this to, okay. Okay, yeah, no, no, you did the right thing. Okay. Okay, lecture. I guess I have to tell it if I'm doing it through my computer or doing it through somebody else's.
Yeah, hold this, huh?
This is how you tell it, but there's something here, there's something fancy, which I don't quite understand, but we'll manage.
Let's try.
Okay. Yeah. That's good.
Okay.
It should be.
Let's start.
Should be. All right.
זה לאחרונה, זה חוק חדש, ממש לאחרונה.
Restricting, huh? Huh? Yeah, restricting exponentially.
It's not a problem.
The right thing to stay, right? No, the wrong thing to stay. Oh, then you and this. No, I don't think it's all right. Okay, so let's begin. Let's wait one moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is four different things, I hope. Some of them will be quick, some of them will be slow. The quick thing will be going over what happened last time, very quickly. And the other two things that I will be talking about is I'm going to tell you a little bit about an experiment that was done in order to try to distinguish between two different kinds of syntactic relations along the lines we discussed last time, which I'll remind you quickly of. And then we're going to talk very briefly about the last chapter from Sue Carey's book on the representation of the abstract concept of causation. And finally, I'll talk to you a little bit about the homomorphism. And so this is what I'm going to do. And then Luca is going to start talking about, you know, what's the relationship between predicates that reflect, predicates that denote mental states and truth. And since I'm sure that you all read the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry, you could see that there are problems with respect to knowledge and truth. There are problems that arise when one considers knowledge in the context of truth. One of those is what you may have seen, these Gettier problems, one of which was demonstrated in God. Okay, so what did we do last time? First of all, we talked about a syntactic argument, you know, that supports the representational aspect of modularity. And by the representational aspect, I meant something that is formally represented by some kind of a formal root system. And the question in that case was, given certain kinds of regularity that one observes in natural language, can these regularities be captured by a single type of group? And one thing I showed you is that in order to represent, in order to understand why there are seeming paradoxes in terms of grammaticality, of reflexes and their antecedents, in the context of declarative sentences, on the one hand, and questions, on the other hand, the way to, one way at least, one could offer others, one way to resolve this paradox is by assuming two different kinds of relations such that one, two different kinds of formal operations such that one feeds the other. And this is how you conclude that you actually need two types of grammatical relations. So this is one thing that we saw, and we looked at question and expressions versus versus reflexes, and they're being bound by a local antecedent. This is what we saw. We also saw some argument about their modularity of processing, an argument that there's a problem, and we saw something having to do with the cross-modal test of lexical access. The test was called cross-modal because it was in both auditory and visual modality. So the basic idea was that, people were represented with sentences auditorily. They were then exposed to a certain kind of word that was flashed at a given point in time. And the question was the auditory context instrumental in facilitating the lexical access? And the conclusion was, no, it was not. So lexical access in this case was unaffected by context, what we usually call left context, namely something which you've already experienced, obviously. And the conclusion there was that lexical access mechanisms are modularized from the rest of the linguistic device, namely at the moment where a word is accessed, it is accessed independent of whatever compositional processes that would have resulted in complex meaning, whatever compositional processes had previously produced. So the idea is you look at a word, and you look at a word independent of the synthetic piece of knowledge that had been produced earlier to that moment, because had you consulted that synthetic knowledge in these kinds of experiments, you could have created a shortcut that would in fact facilitate your lexical access. This is the logical structure of the argument. Of course, here the problem is, how small can a cognitive module be? It's pretty small, just that module that does lexical access. Arguably, it might be a little bit too small, so perhaps we can think about setting up some kind of a lower bound of the size of the module. I don't exactly know how to even formulate that, but you could see that this is a potential problem to this type of architectural view. And finally, what we saw was what I thought was a pretty weak argument for neuromodularity. It was more of an anecdote than anything else, and it's important to note why this is an anecdote. So what we saw is a woman who can sing. She's an opera singer. She had a stroke. We saw that she can sing. We saw that her comprehension abilities are terrible in syntax. I told you that her speaking abilities were terrible. And we also saw something about her math abilities. And one thing I told you is that this is a pretty weak argument. And when you think about it, but this is the kind of argument that flies around on the web and that you can see in Science and Nature. This is the kind of thing that makes the big journals in neuroscience. And the reason it makes the big journals is because it makes a good anecdote. But when you start reflecting on it, it turns out that this is as far as one can imagine from being a controlled experiment. So there's something that hits your intuition that's very nice. You can sing, but you can't speak. But did we really control for anything like task difficulty, like the representational resources that are required, like even the duration of the task? From the most trivial to the most complex aspects of the task, nothing is controlled. And still, this type of anecdote is something that flies around the web. It's something that people remember. So, it's something that's kind of suggestive, but it's nothing beyond an anecdote, and it's important to realize that. I want to tell you just a little bit, by way of concluding this section of modularity, I wanted to show you just one experiment. I kind of showed it to you, but I went very quickly over it, and I'll show it to you again. distinguishing between the binding of reflexive and the left displacement of question expressions. And just to remind you how these relations worked, let me show you once again. Is there anything? Is there an eraser here? This is always hopeless to find an eraser. Maybe, if you don't mind. Ah, Luca. Yeah. השיעורים של חומסקי תמיד היו ביום חמישי בשתיים, בכיתה איפה שהוא עשה את השיעור, אין כאן מישהו שרוצה לדבר, אני חושב לא בעברית, נכון? בכיתה איפה שהוא עשה את השיעור, היה לפני זה איזה שיעור בפיזיקה או משהו. ותמיד הם היו משאירים לו לוח מלוכלך. הוא היה נכנס לשיעור, זה דבר מעצבן, הוא היה נכנס לשיעור, הוא היה אומר, but wait for Luca, because I don't think he knows the story. I was erasing, okay, so as I was erasing it, I was reminded of a popular trick that Chomsky used to do. Yeah. So, I used to teach always on Thursday at 2 p.m., and it was always in the same room, the infant corridor. Okay. And right beforehand, for years, there was some chemistry or physics class, with lots of this kind of stuff. So he used to go to the blackboard, which is kind of annoying because nobody erases at the end of their class, okay? Yeah. And he used to look at us and say, well, this is obviously false. Okay, and then erase it. So I'm not Chomsky, and Jonathan is not a chemist, but still.
No, you know, you should have done, like you should have corrected some subscripts here before erasing.
Right. Sure. Okay. So anyway, so the relation we're talking about is this. What we have is some kind of, let's call it a noun. And then we have something like himself. Okay? And what we have is an issue in which we see that if this noun is masculine, the sentence is good, the sentence is good, and if this noun is feminine, the sentence is bad. So this marks a bad sentence. Something like that, and vice versa. What we saw, okay, is the following. In fact, there was a little something else which should be added. This sentence was embedded in another sentence, and there was another noun here. And this noun actually was feminine, and this noun was masculine. And what we saw is that this sentence is good and this sentence was bad. This was the initial observation. The next observation, and from which we concluded that there is some kind of a notion of locality which needs to be obeyed, because even though there is a masculine antecedent further out from this reflexive, still the sentence is bad. I'm deliberately giving it to you in a non-interpreted way, in an abstract way, so that you see the logic of it. That's important. So you see this, and you conclude that there is some notion of a local domain such that both the reflexive and its antecedent must be within it, and they must agree in gender. But there is some kind of a structural notion of a local domain. This is step one. Step two, you take this guy and you ask a question. And you realize that upon being asked a question, so you have some kind of a question, let's say which noun, and the noun is feminine because it's this guy, you still have this guy here, and then you have himself. And I'm deliberately blurring this, I'm ignoring this for the moment. You can see that even though, in this case, the closest noun to the reflexive agrees with it in gender, the sentence sorry, I got it backwards. Even though the closest noun to the reflexive disagrees with it in gender, the sentence is still grammatical. That's the puzzle. And likewise, if you have the same situation where you do the same kind of thing, and here you end up having the closest guy agreeing with the reflexive, but the question, wait a second, right, but the question not agreeing with it, the sentence is still ungrammatical. This was what we saw, this was the puzzle. And the conclusion, the way for us to solve this puzzle was to say that in fact a question process is a complex operation. What you do, the local domain remains exactly the same across all cases, namely the sentence structure is unaffected by the process of question asking. And what you see is you look at the question formation rule such that you take the noun, you replace it with the question expression, you copy it to the front, and then you erase it. It's a complex operation. And in fact, before you do all that, at the very beginning of this abstract operation, you check to see whether the reflexive has a local antecedent. So the trick is to say the reason you have a reversal in grammaticality with respect to linear proximity is because the process of checking of the reflexive between the reflexive of its antecedent, checking for a locality relation, is actually done before question formation. So you tease these two kinds of relations apart. And this is how you explain this little puzzle. Now, of course, I hope you understand that this little puzzle that you had last time is just a reflection of a much broader set of cases. It's just to show you the logic of the relationship. But this is basically what we saw last time. And what I want to show you now is an experiment that in fact teased these two relations apart neurologically. And the logic of it was the following. What we have is two kinds of relations. One that resembles the relationship between between two positions. So we said that we have something like, I don't know, John saw Mary, okay? And then a question of John saw Mary. If we want to ask a question, so this, let's say this is John saw Mary. If we want to ask a question, we take this guy, let's say we want to ask a question like, who is the person that has the property of having been seen by John? What we do is we take Mary, we replace it with, let's say, which student. We then copy which student to the beginning of the sentence, and we erase it here. And there is some kind of a memory that preserves the position at which this whole complex process took place. And it is somehow related to this, and we need it for independent reasons. So this is the relation of question formation. There's another relation of dependency between different positions in a sentence, which is something like John likes himself. So here you have a dependency between these two positions. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is to say, well, these two are some trivial memory piece. And all you need to do is just to look at parts of your brain. If you give people tasks that have to do with these two things, you just need some trivial piece of memory and nothing else. And these two things will require memory, and there's nothing interesting about it altogether. Well, first of all, if they do require the same kind of memory, then it surely follows that in fact what you end up having is a system that has the same kinds of constraints on the relationship between the two positions. And it turns out that there are very different constraints holding here and holding here. That's sort of an observation. But the other question is, can we in fact find experimental evidence, and in particular neurological evidence, kinds of sentences because they share just some properties. They don't share all properties. This one has a question expression. This one has a reflexive. There are all kinds of differences. And the solution for that is to nest each of these, to nest a parameter within each of these. So the basic idea was to create this kind of design, which looks like this. In one instance, what you do is you have a sequence of nouns. These are noun phrases, never mind. You have a sequence of nouns, and you have a relation that in fact resembles questions, never mind the details of it. It's something having to do with relative clauses, but the basic properties of it, the formal properties, are properties of questions. And what you do is you make that link between the position, the original position, in which from which this was copied, you start increasing the distance between that position and the position of the question expression. And the increase is done in a very specific way. It's done in terms of adding the same type of intervener, but adding more of them, more nouns in the middle. You'll see it in the second how it translates into words and into sentences. I just want you to see the logic of it. And you do the same thing here. You do this, without an intervener, with one intervener, with two interveners. So you basically have this kind of incrementally injected parameter into this contrast. And what you'll be interested in is to see whether whatever the dependent measure will end up being, I don't know, brain activity, reaction time, errors, whatever dependent measure you end up looking at, you want to see whether this particular dependent measure is affected differentially by the addition of this nested parameter in this case and the nested parameter here. In other words, what you would be looking for are linear effects, and you'll be looking at the slope of the slope of the line that you will end up constructing. You can think about it this way. You can think about it in terms of interactions, whichever way you want. So this is the kind of experiment that can tease these things apart, just so that you see the sentences. They look a little odd and they look a little cumbersome, but they're good sentences in English. And the important thing is not so much the properties of each of them, but the contrast between these types. So you can see sentences like the mailman and the mother of Jim love the woman who gave birth, versus the mother of Jim loves the woman who the mailman who gave birth, and so on and so forth. These are strange sentences. They're not bizarre, they're not ungrammatical, but they're a little strange. I acknowledge that. And the question that was asked in this case was whether you will find regions in the brain that selectively activate for the increase of the taxing of whatever memory for this kind of relation, but not for this kind of relation, and vice versa. And the answer is yes. You do find such things. We can see here there's the parametric increase in one relation and in fact decrease in the other. Again, the results don't really matter much what exactly was found. What's important is the logical structure of the argument. And this is what you see here. The logical structure is you find neurological modularity by taking two kinds of relations and teasing them apart neurologically, but doing it in a way that's very tightly controlled, and in this case, it's controlled by a parametric effect. So this is the basic feature that you see. So what we've seen some modularity in terms of processing. We've seen modularity in representation, but we've seen a little bit of an aspects of modularity in neurology. And of course, these are just examples, and of course, the story gets a little broader, and that actually brings us to the last leg of our discussion right now of the Sukh-Harry paper and this book. And the Sukh-Harry book, in this case, looks at one thing, which is the abstract representation of cause. I'm not going to dwell too much on it because we've seen enough of this, like rows of experiments that get tighter and tighter and tighter. It's just, the important thing right now is to look at the logical structure of things and not at like the nitty-gritty details. And here the point is that cause is taken to be an abstract concept, and the claim is it's not derivable. The reason we know it's so abstract, and what's important about it is that it's not derivable from sense data. And that in order, and the question one might ask is, does it or does it not presuppose contact mechanics? Okay, you need to assume, you know, motion and contact or not. And there are different hypotheses, you know, of course, one possible hypothesis is that actually is derived from sense data. And another one is that it's derived, but it's actually derived not from sense data, it's derived from sense data, but it's actually learned from, it's something that's concluded from some other aspects of cognition. So it's like internally created perhaps through an interaction with some sense data. And other positions would argue that in fact it is innate and modular, and another position would be it's innate but non-modular. Okay. Why is this important at all? Well, it's important because causation is really clearly something that occupies the minds of many in most sciences, but also you want to understand how it came to our heads to begin with. Okay, so some aspects of it have to do with the existence of abstract context, with their innateness, and also the modularity, which are the central notions that have, along which, you know, that have been thrown here in this room. Okay. There was somebody called Michot, I guess, a Belgian psychologist, so I'm told, you know, I have to admit I've never heard about him before I read Zucker's book, but that doesn't mean much, just maybe tells something about my limitations. And what Michot said was things about causation and the representation of causation. One thing that he says is that, you know, these are very immediate. I'm recasting it in Fowler's modularity terms. You know, these businesses are being encapsulated, specific, obligatory, and so on and so forth. So Michot actually came up with a very radical position about it, and he said, well, it's very specific because it's restricted to visual stimuli, and the kinds of building blocks that bring about the concept of causation have to do with different types of motion. You know, and the different types of motion at issue are either launching something, you know, kicking something else into motion, or chasing, which are two things moving, you know, sharing motion parameters, but not necessarily contacting. And, you know, there are also independent types of motion. And the idea is that these kinds of building blocks, while being presented to the visual modality, this is what would bring about the representation of cause. That's the basic idea. Okay. The point here is that, you know, the argument at least would say that this kind of concept is informationally encapsulated. Why is it so? Because prior knowledge, belief, and so on would not affect it. And of course, the question is, would you also find separate, you know, like distinctness of this kind of thing in the development, in terms of developmental curves, you know, as opposed to other types of knowledge that develops, and in terms of neurology, some neurological representation. The basic experiments here are quite predictable in terms of their components, which you basically want to see. Again, it's the same paradigm that will come back soon. Again, when we discuss the homework, this differential looking time paradigm, and the basic idea is to see whether kids are surprised that two things are or are not in contact. So the contrast, you know, the thing that's conceived is whether or not there's contact between the two objects, one the launcher and the other one the launchee, or something like that. So, you know, you present this kind of thing, something moves into behind the screen, the other thing starts moving, and then when you expose it, when there is contact, kid is not surprised. When there is I'm sorry, the other way around. When there is contact, kid is not surprised. When this guy starts moving without contact, very big surprise. So you actually conclude that, you know, kids believe in contact mechanic, and in fact they can infer from the unseen. They can infer the cause of motion because they have the concept of cause. Otherwise, why should they be surprised? So that's the basic idea here. And you can get more refined with that and ask whether this notion of cause pertains just to these types of motion, namely joint motion or launching and so on, or do you actually break it down into smaller pieces, like change of state as a consequence of launching. So, upon being hit, if you explode, this would be a change of state. Would kids be sensitive to this kind of thing? And yeah, it turns out that kids can infer the unseen, but the thing is they understand this notion of cause only for motion events. So if you change the state, if the object doesn't move but rather changes color, the kid is not surprised. Things like that, and then you do it with many different other things. You want to see if the introduction of some human or humanly resembling object changes the situation. You can play with it in many, many ways and come to this or that conclusion. The reason I'm bringing this up is just for you to know that in fact these kinds of things do exist, and that there's a world out there that discusses in the context of developmental psychology. So this is pretty much the end of this section, and with that, I want to move to the puzzle of this McGurk effect. And the puzzle of the McGurk effect, as we've seen, has several components, as you've seen by reading it, has several components to it. Component number one is the one that says, well, take two phonemes, and take two syllables, let's say, and the two syllables will be either visually recorded or auditorily recorded. And the question is, do we or do we not notice a mismatch between the visual and the auditory? And the answer is, of course, we notice a mismatch, and upon there being mismatch, we make errors. So this is something that everybody could see, and this is like as trivial as these things ever get. What's exciting about this McGurk effect, or seems to be exciting, is not the fact that people make errors. It's the fact that they make errors of a particular sort. Errors is really nothing. It's clear that you make errors when you get information that that conflicts your past experience in a very blatant way. And the question is the type of errors that you make. And one question that hardly anyone asked upon when you read your homework is, why were these kinds of syllables selected in the first place? Why were they selected? What makes them special? And the only reason it was important to ask this kind of question is because had you asked this question, you would have perhaps seen more clearly the difference between the McGurk and McDonald experiment and the Rosenblum experiment. They're very different to begin with. So one thing that you might want to look at, and I hinted at one point, I told Carmel, she came to my office and I said, search phonetic or phonological distinctive features. Just put it in Google and see what it is. And it turns out that there are such things. And let me just walk you through such things very briefly. Okay? It turns out that when you look at consonants, let's look just at consonants, you can represent consonants as some kind of a set of feature values. So there is some kind of a feature matrix that represents the phonetic, the consonants in English. Let's talk about English now. We're not yet in times here in making universal generalizations. And there are like feature matrices that represent these kinds of that uniquely characterize the phonemes or consonants in English that have been known for, I guess, almost 100 years, since the 1930s, I think. Pretty much since the 1930s. Actually, for those of you interested in this, there's an amazing article in Science last year by somebody called Mesgarani, Nima Mesgarani, and many others. It's an incredible article where, so the name is Mesgarani. And it came out last year where he actually read off these kinds of distinctive features. He read them all straight from Cortex. It's unbelievable. Okay, I'm being very superficial. So if you want the reference, go to my website or Eddie Melken's website. We actually wrote a commentary. Eddie and I wrote a commentary for Science about this. They have something like papers that they want for which they want more visibility. They have a commentary. And extracted straight from, from like cortical recordings, intraoperative cortical recordings. They actually extracted these feature matrices. It's quite amazing. So each of the consonants is actually represented, typically the most superficial way, by like three features. One is called manner, the other one is called place, and the third one is called voice. So something can be either voiced or voiceless, the difference between p and b. And in fact, both of them, when you say pa, you voice, okay? But if you put your finger, just do this. Put your finger here and say ba. Okay, just do it. Just say ba. Okay, now put your finger in the same place and say pa. Do you notice that there's a slight delay in the vibration? Do it again. Maybe it's difficult to notice. When you measure it, you notice a difference of, I don't know, about 100 milliseconds or something like this. So the distinctive parameter in terms of something being voiced or not, which is highly relevant to the homework, ba and pa, is the voice, what's called voice onset time, the timing of the voicing after you have this explosion of air out of your mouth. So, pa, you accumulate, you increase, you close all the cavities, you close all the holes out, maybe both your nose and your mouth. You increase the pressure inside this cavity, and then you let it explode. So these things are called actually plosive, okay? Because you let the air explode out. Ba, ka, ga, da, ta. Okay? These are called plosive, as opposed to those in which the air goes out smoothly and creates some kind of friction. Va, fa, fa, ha, and so on and so forth. And these, not surprisingly, are actually called fricative. Okay? Because they do create some kind of friction. Okay, so this is like the most basic thing, and in fact, when you think about it, what would be the difference between ba and va? The difference between ba and va would be exactly along these lines, the manner. One is fricative, okay, and the other one is plosive, b. Okay, this is the difference between them. They're voiced in the same way, and the third thing which is relevant, the place of articulation is the same. It's both lips. Ba, va. Actually, some people will tell you that va, in fact, is not exactly both lips, but it's actually both the teeth. But let's just put this minor difference aside. So there are actually it's like a three-dimensional representation. There are like three kinds of basic features, each of which breaks down into different feature values, and you can represent each of the consonants in the English language along these. This is what I was hoping you'll find. Maybe you did.
No, yeah, but Goethe said they're using ba and ga, which are
Okay, so now you want to ask yourself is why did they select ba and ga? So if you look at this, why did they select ba and ga?
because they're both
Because they share two features and they distinguish they're distinct from one another only in place. So they're both plosive, they're both voiced. What would be the unvoiced analog of ga?
ka.
Right, ka. Exactly, okay. But they didn't choose this multi-dimensional contrast. They went only along one dimension, which is place. This is the one thing that they chose. And you can see, why did I bring this here? Because you can actually see how you can go back. You can go back. So these are the lips, and this is where you say something about ga because you close off this part. And the result is not exactly surprising. Fusion is not something that comes out of your nose, like na. Fusion gives you some kind of an average between the two, namely something that happens in the higher, your upper palate. Okay, that. It's not accidental. These things have structure. Otherwise, there would be no interest in it. If all there was, as some of you said in your responses, they make errors. If that's all there was, there would be zero interest in this business. The point here is that the errors are highly, highly structured. This is what makes it exciting. And not only are they highly structured, but they're actually highly structured in a way that creates bizarre kinds of errors. So there are fusion errors and the combination errors. This is something that you all saw. I mean, you have eyes, you can read tables. That's very clear. So you all saw these things. There are combination errors first of all, the first thing that I was hoping he would do is to look at the kinds of errors that were made and reason why this is interesting in the first place. Because why? Because one could imagine that had they been given, I don't know, had they been given a movie or bar, and then they would be given the audio file of now, maybe they would give you some garbage. Here it was highly structured because the stimuli were highly structured. And once you think about it this way, and you see that this is the difference, you start realizing perhaps something that Rosenblum and her, I don't know, these people, realized themselves kind of tacitly. Because they actually made a distinction between fusion and domination, that they call it, and dominance. They made a distinction between these things. And you ask yourself, why don't you notice the difference between ba and va? Well, it's too close. Like something very banal, very trivial. It's just too close, that's all. So the reason, the first suspicion I would have with respect to this experiment is that the reason they didn't, the reason this experiment is suspect in the first place is because they just didn't look at the right kinds of contrasts. It's almost trivial. They just didn't look at the right contrasts. But in order for you to do so, what you have to do is first of all to realize what's interesting about McGurk, namely structured errors, not just errors. And secondly, to start asking yourself what's the reason for these structured errors? Why do the errors take this shape and not some other shape? Okay. So, to me, what I would say is like this is perhaps an existence proof of the possibility of A-B fusion, where by fusion one should say quite precisely, at least on one dimension, namely the dimension of place of articulation, on this dimension, this is a dimension which brings about fusion errors. I don't know about the others. We hardly have any evidence about the others. Okay. You can also see why va and da are to some extent better, because it's a little bit further to the back, not sufficiently I would imagine, but it's a little bit further to the back, but also it is different in terms of the contrast of plosive versus fricative. So ba and va arguably only different from one another in manner, namely plosive versus fricative, whereas ba and va and da are, different along two of these dimensions. So we have these like feature spaces that we can in fact look at, and perhaps there's something fancier about these fusion errors that has to do with feature spaces and the degree to which two consonants differ in terms of features. That's a possibility. So, to me, the answer here is when, first of all, you can see, when you have this, you get fusion errors. When you flip the order, you have certain weird combinations. But you can see, all of you noticed for sure, that even in the combination errors, there's some kind of special characteristic, which in fact is repeated across the plus-minus voice distinction. So ga and ka are distinct from one another by this difference of voice onset time. You wait longer when you say ka, you wait longer before you vibrate your vocal cords than you do in the case of ga, on the one hand. But the interesting thing is that ga and ba give you this ga and ba, ga ba is a combination, and ka and pa is a combination, give you different kinds of combination. While being different, they give the same kind of combination errors. It's quite amazing when you think about it. So all you need to do is just to look at the content of the contrasts, and I think the mistake that many of you make as a homework is you just looked at the very basic framework of the design, and you didn't look at the content. But the content is exactly what the thing was about.
The errors were structured.
I'm sorry?
The errors were structured.
I mean, your errors. Oh, they were highly structured. Yeah. There's more. They were highly structured. They were really highly structured. Okay. And then the next thing, well, there's another doing those things which I raised with the indices and the subscripts. Okay, I'm not going to teach you this kind of stuff. But the one thing that we hope to teach you is maybe a little bit about reasoning. And I can tell you that this is something that I really hope we're successful, because it's not, in the first question, the most common error to me was, at least half the class, I think, instead of telling us what happened, what was done and what happened, you gave the interpretation of the authors. And especially in psychological experiments, the distinction between what people did and what they think they did and how they talk about what they did is something that you need to pay attention to. It's, the overlap between what people say about what they did and what they actually did is not always fantastic. Okay, so this is something that I think needs to be noticed. Okay. Of course, the next question has to do with Fodor, and like Fodor's modularity. And there are two things to notice here, I think. The first thing to notice is that, you get, from my perspective, you get a very mixed answer to this kind of question. It's mixed because for Fodor, there's this business of domain specificity, or whatever he calls it, encapsulation. Okay. So what are the domains that are possible? It's something that Zuccari doesn't discuss, I think, but it's really clear. The domains should somehow correspond to sensory domains. That's for sure. So it's fairly clear that sensory and auditory domains are distinct from one another. So if you get a fusion between something that's auditory and something that's visual, you have some violation of this type of this property. This property is immediately violated. Okay, and you see that. So this is one thing. The second thing that I was hoping you would see, and some did, but not all, is that there's this business of what Fodor calls impenetrability and Zuccari calls inaccessibility. So the point here is that prior knowledge doesn't help. And this is something we discussed in the context of the Miller-Lyer paradox, this lines, with arrows pointing inside or pointing outside. You can measure it 5,000 times and you will still end up seeing it, one of them is being longer than the other. So past knowledge or background knowledge doesn't help you. And the same thing holds of this. This is what's remarkable. And this is why I wrote to you, look at the tape, close your eyes and do it again. And I think it's a shocking experience that it doesn't help. You can close your eyes. I don't know. Did anyone manage to convince him or herself that you're actually hearing something different or seeing something different? It's very difficult. It's an extremely powerful kind of effect. Okay, so the remarkable thing about it is that past knowledge, that in fact you're hearing ba and seeing da, it doesn't help you. And this is exactly inaccessibility. So we have a very mixed picture here with respect to this modularity. One property is violated, the other one is satisfied. Okay. Next thing has to do with this Rosenblum. And here you can, I've already said something about it, and the basic idea is, is the idea of congruence or matching and mismatch between what you see and what you hear. Okay? This is the basic idea. This is the only idea, in fact, that's preserved from the Gerg. The only idea is just the mismatch, nothing else. And the basic idea is let's habituate on this A-B congruence and then test on incongruence, and we'll see if the incongruence looks like the previous one, what you call generalization, or they call it generalization. Do you generalize or do you not generalize? And the point is, sometimes you generalize and sometimes you don't, if indeed looking time is a good index of generalization. So everybody, every single person pointed out the truly profound insight that looking time is not exactly like perceptual report. So, repetition is basically reporting what you perceive. Okay? This is repetition. So looking time is different from perceptual report. That's great. You're absolutely right. But the question is, why is it bad? What's bad about it and what's good about it? And I can give you at least my opinion. There are two kinds of things that needs to be done when you compare the Rosenblum experiment to the McGurk-McDonald experiment. First one we've already discussed, the business of poor choice of contrasts. leads to this business of dominance versus fusion. This is the thing. And this is to begin with, the choice of stimuli is of the wrong kind. So no wonder that you find all kinds of weird stuff if you make the wrong choice. I mean, the most uninspiring but probably correct thing to have done is just to take the same stimuli as McGurk and McDonald took and do it with kids. You know, it's like you have to put zero thought to it, or almost near zero thought in doing this. But this is the right thing to do in this case.
Why is this dimension are right?
I didn't say that the dimension is right. The one thing that I said is that what McGurk and McDonald did is they gave you an existence proof. They gave you an existence proof. They showed you, they're not careful enough, okay, but they do show you in interpreting. They're not careful enough in interpreting what they found, but they're at least showing you that there is a dimension along this feature matrix. There is a contrast. There is a featural. There are featural choices, or choices of featural values. I'm sort of repeating myself and trying to say it precisely. There are contrasting choices or mismatches in choice of featural value that bring about fusion errors. This is the remarkable thing. It's just an existence.
But you invent this feature.
What do you mean you invent?
Someone invented it. It's not
I
something
don't
that is
understand.
given.
I don't understand. I don't understand ontological. Ontological.
Okay, I understand. These three features
Uh-huh.
are a product of someone's mind. It's not
Sure.
something.
This is the bit, but
It's a
do you have an alternative?
No.
It's just a theory.
No, it's a theory, but my question is it's holding every kind of validation, like.
You should have asked this earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's assume you asked it earlier.
didn't want to
Sure.
interrupt
Let's
your
assume,
flow.
Sure. Let's assume you asked it earlier. And let's play a game now. This is why I told you we're not in a class on phonology. This is not a phonology class. This is now a class where we're just playing with some kind of a toy world. And in our toy world, this is universally true. This is the ultimate representation of the inventory of consonants in any language right now. Just in order to put the phonological field, the debates that one might have with phonology, to put them aside, because we want to look at the logical. So let's just give it to me, and give it to me as a methodological gesture. And the methodological gesture is, this is our universe. And this is what we're discussing, and while you could imagine that this is a questionable kind of analysis, let's just take it for what it is, and follow it through, okay? Your point is well taken, but it belongs to another class, which is a class of phonology. So let's just take it as the ultimate truth, and go with it, okay? So this is the ultimate truth. This is the most compact representation of the inventory of consonants in any human language. This is the assumption that we are now going by, okay? If so, then it turns out that the McGurk-McDonald experiment gives us an existence proof, but just an existence proof. It's much more modest than they present. All they show you is that there exist certain kinds of featural mismatches which are chosen from this feature. And if you take something that's pretty far, namely something that's labial, and you compare it to something that's velar, this is as distant as these things get, because one of them comes from here and one of them comes from here. If you show the movie, I always forget the order, but it doesn't matter. If you show a movie with one of them and have an audio with the other, and keep all other featural dimensions fixed, namely not matching, if you do this, you end up with a very interesting kind of error. Now, I'm pretty sure, just intuitively speaking, that if you increase the distance in terms of choosing different kinds, different feature values on the other featural dimensions, you'd get more errors. It's fairly clear that you get more errors. The question would be, would you get these errors to be as highly structured think about being a prophet for just 1 second, I would predict that upon making these kinds of vast changes, you start getting garbage. People who don't know, people who guess, people who do all kinds of stuff. The nice thing about this is that it's highly structured. That's the important thing. So it's just an existence proof, nothing much beyond it. Okay? All right.
But, the existence proof, like you said, is that there exist these, constants that if you do the second time, you get a fused response.
Uh-huh.
Now, and what we're claiming about the second, the Rosenthal group,
Yeah.
is that there is no fused response. There's only like a dominant.
Sure.
Okay, so the reason that it's not, or I think what I'm asking if what you're trying to say is that the reason that it's not stimulus to McGurk effect is based on that.
This
That
is
there's
one
no-
reason.
Okay.
This is one reason. This is reason number one. It's like it's kind of the trivial reason. It's poor choice. It's the poor choice of stimuli. And you can
Not
see in the
necessarily
time.
poor choice.
Sorry?
In their setup, you can't do diffusion because it's a new stimulus and you can't habituate to a new thing.
Wait a second. We're not there yet. Slow down. You're running too fast. I happen to disagree with you, and I can tell you, you disagree with me. It so happens, yes, it so happens that I remember what you responded, and I remember your experimental proposal.
I know.
And your experimental proposal, no wait, and your experimental proposal fits my setup much better. And you'll see in a second. So let's just go slowly. Okay? So first objection, we don't want to capture everything in like one stride, slowly. So point number one is to say that there's something about the choice of stimuli that makes these things lopsided, and lo and behold, big surprise, the kinds of errors that you get are not of the same kind. They're not the same. This dominance errors are trivial. Like you can imagine, this probably happens to all of us twice a day, these kinds of errors. With all kinds of words in languages that we speak and languages that we do not. If you're deaf like me, it happens to you 50 times a day. It happens to me all the time. I'm deaf. So it happens to me all the time. Especially if I don't see the face. Okay. So what's the big deal? There's nothing impressive about this dominance business. What's amazing, it's like I really want you to appreciate this. Generally, I can tell you, I'm not fooled by effects. Psychology is full of effects. I'm not fooled by effects. I want the effects to be interpretable by some theory. This is what makes me tick, at least. Okay? But this is an effect that's amazing, because it's so highly structured. So the thing here is to see that this is just the wrong choice. And the next thing is this business of habituation that everybody, of course, latched on. Okay? Everybody hooked up and said, well, this is habituation. Of course, we can't ask these kids what they actually perceive. So what's wrong about habituation? The kid cannot report what the person thought. This is the problem, because they can't speak. Okay, great.
No, but,
Yeah.
like, there's another objection about habituation. I don't know if it's in the list.
Right. There's your objection too. Right. You might want
That it's not only, even if you accept habituation, specifically habituation with looking time, when the whole effect is based on looking, is problematic. Because the minute that he changes his
your gaze.
his gaze, even for a second, the experiment ends only if he changes his gaze for 2 seconds. But even if it's just for a second he changes, technically he should be hearing something different.
Right.
Because the whole thing is based
Right.
on.
Well, that's a very good point. So Carmen made this point, and it's a valid point. The whole business is about using auditory and visual, and if there's no visual, then what's the big deal? Okay. Sure. That's a very nice point. Okay. So there's this experimental problem here in addition. But now the question is, so now the next question, of course, is, well, suppose we change the stimuli, and you say, okay, just leave me alone, I'll take your stimuli. And we take the stimuli for which we've already established this existence proof of fusion. Okay? So what if we replace the stimuli? Then your objection still holds, namely, even if you replace the stimuli, you still end up with this looking time paradigm, and the looking time paradigm question is, can we actually get around this type of limitation and still know that the kids habituated to the fused form? This is the question. So what we've seen, what this habituation paradigm tells you, you habituate to something, and now you get a test, and we ask, is it or is it the same as the thing that you've seen before? This is what you call generalization. What they did was, they habituated the babies, they habituated these babies So what did they do? They have an auditory and a visual thing, and it was the same thing. So let's say va, and here you have va. So this is the habituation phase. This is the habituation phase. Okay? And now the question is, what happens in the test phase? What happens in the test phase? So the habituation phase has the same stimulus, and now you give them something new, I don't know, ba, ba, right? Something like that. And you ask, you want to see if they habituated to it. But suppose we flip the order. All we need is just to flip the order. And let's just change it back to the right, what I would think would be the right kind of stimuli. And let's see the logic of it. So all you need to do is to say, look, let's do this ba-ga. Okay? If we do the ba-ga, here, what would be the fusion error? Da, right? This is the fusion error. Okay, done. You don't need anything else. I don't care now what the kid says and if he can or cannot say. All you need is to have a clear hypothesis about what the error type is. And if the error type is consistent, that means that upon showing the kid ba versus ga, the kid would be hearing da. If the kid heard da, and you present the kid with da here, they should fall asleep immediately. That's all you need. You don't need perceptual reports.
But the problem with that is that in the McGurk effect, the original one, that was the main error, but it wasn't 100%. It was like 60, 40, or...
Let's get 20% to begin with. You know, the numbers, you know, what you need to do is to
You could do
abstract.
the
In
same
such
also with
cases,
Ga and Ba.
I'm sorry? Sure, you could do the same, and then, in fact, yeah.
See
and
the
then,
error, like
then, so let's say you do ga, let's just do the same thing. So suppose you do ga and ba.
No,
Okay?
and it's...
No, let's just play with me for a second. What would be the thing that you would put here?
No, but it's problem because...
What happened when you gave the adults ga and ba?
They heard the combination.
So give the combination. That would be even more striking. You give this strange combination of bag-ba or gab-ga, something like this. Okay? If indeed what was reported is what is, you know, the thing that adults reported is what they indeed perceived, and if children indeed perceive this, habituate them on ga and ba, and expect them to fall asleep on bag-ba.
But the
If
theory
they
is
don't,
like...
you can't
It
conclude.
goes in one direction, I agree with you, but still, you know, it would be, if you demonstrate this, it really would be amazing. And the whole thing here is just predicated on one little thing, which is paying attention to the properties of the errors. This is the key to this whole business. You look at the properties of the errors and you see that they're highly structured. And how do you know that they're highly structured? And this comes back to our own question, right? It comes back to our own question. There's only one way of knowing that something is highly structured. If you have, pardon the expression, a structural theory. Okay? This is the only way. There's no other way. So we have a structural theory, and we have a means to analyze the errors from which it follows that they're highly structured. And then the problem is solved.
Question was if this theory holds
No, the question is legitimate, but I'm saying for these experiments, this theory is perfect.
yeah, but someone did this experiment.
unless you have some alternative, I'd be very interested in hearing an alternative. But it's not easy to come up with one, and this seems to be fairly simple. So that was the reason for this exercise.
My
Okay.
question is if babies are not succeeding in this,
In which one? In this
it
one?
means that the theory is wrong or
No, no. First of
For
all,
babies, yes.
okay.
For babies.
So for this, I think we had this discussion about
Yeah.
refutation.
Okay.
Sure, it means that the theory is wrong. But the question is, what do you do when you conclude that the theory is wrong? Do you go home and cry? Do you look for some other theory? This is the only question. But the answer is, sure, of course the theory is wrong.
For babies.
Well, in this case, it's going to be for babies.
Okay.
There's one last comment with respect to, we asked you to design an experiment and come up with something, and at the same time to come up with potential predictions as to what this experiment would be. And people gave all kinds of things. But the one thing that was lacking in most cases was reasoning for why this prediction is there. And the only anchor that you could have had is if you went back to so the question is, we redesign the experiment and we do it right. And by the way, many of you said, well, looking time is not a stable, reliable measure, let's do EEG. First of all, I gather none of you have done an EEG experiment, because, talking about the stability and reliability, I'm not exactly sure which is more stable. But secondly, why would EEG solve the problem of perceptual reporting? It would not. EEG, the percept doesn't jump out of the electrode. It doesn't work this way. And what you needed to reason is why the change of methodology, maybe to justify change of methodology, but you need to have reasoning.
Why? Because there is the mismatch negativity.
But remember, I think you said mismatch negativity, and you said that mismatch negativity, in fact, I just read, I don't have such great memory, but I read your assignment about half an hour ago. Okay? No, I read hers yesterday. I read hers yesterday. So let's talk about mismatch negativity, for example. And mismatch negativity is some kind of an index for what?
For surprise.
Great. Okay, this is exactly what you said. So it's an index of surprise, but we know that the kids are surprised by looking time as well. The question is why they're surprised.
The timing is different.
But the surprise,
We don't know they're surprised by the looking time because the control experiment show us that it's not, it can't be that the looking time is what is tell us if they're surprised or not.
it has been, you mean the control experiment with a blank screen? The control experiment with a blank screen? This is the control experiment with the blank screen, right?
Surprise,
This is-
meaning that they're not expecting what will come.
Yes, and they were looking and talking.
Sure, but, okay, so let me rephrase myself to be clear. Your point is well taken. What we know is that they noticed something different. This is the only thing that we know. Okay? But this is the only thing, so they noticed something different. One second. And your point says, well, they noticed something different under different kinds of circumstances. So the assumption is indeed that this kind of difference is less intrusive or less offensive to their the overall perceptual apparatus than this kind of difference. This is why this is thought of as some kind of a control, because this is less offensive. That's the assumption. And I agree with you that it might be a funny assumption. But the only thing that you see via this looking time, I also agree with you that I should probably be a little more careful in saying that, you notice some kind of difference. Whether or not it's surprising to you or offensive to you, it's difficult to say. But you do notice a difference. And this is what changes, this is this is the correlate of change in behavior. Okay, this is the only thing we have. The important point is that it's the same problem with EEG. It tells you that you notice that there's something different, but it doesn't tell you the nature of the difference. And what you want is to know that the difference is in there being fusion errors, this highly structured error. alternative suggestion, what makes this alternative suggestion more viable, at least to my mind, is that instead of looking at something that's different, what you want to see is the generalization. You want the habituation paradigm to be an index of generalization as opposed to a difference that's detected. So the idea here is you want to see whether it's da or something else, habituates to the contrast. Now look at this. And the expectation is very, very clear. The kids should never look at this, even though you know that it's different, because you make them hear ba, and you show them, and then you make them hear da. And here, all of a sudden, they generalize. It's difficult to mistake it for anything other than a fusion F. This is the only move.
The reason I chose EEG is because the methodological experimental problem, not because I didn't know that this was a problem.
This is the problem.
Yeah.
This is, you see, okay.
I didn't
So what's the advantage of EEG?
Because, like Omer said, when
Oh, you mean with the loop?
yeah, with the loop.
Yeah, perhaps. Sure, but that's legit. That's legit. But it's important. You don't know that the kids, Noah, is that your name? Okay, so Noah points out that you don't know that this is surprise or not surprise, and you don't know that her point had to do with looking time. You don't know that increase of looking time is a reflection of surprise. This is
Or
not something.
even of something different, because the control experiment showed that their interpretation was that the infants thought that ba and da are more close than da.
Sure. So let's get to that for a second. The one thing that you see quite clearly is that the effects that you get from the control experiment are way lower than anything that you get elsewhere. This is one thing, and that is consistent with the view that a blank screen with a face that's not moving is less offensive. It's less of a mismatch. That's consistent, okay? So that's something that you see, that if you just took a mean of these three and a mean of these three, of course they would be different. That's quite clear. So this is like some kind of a way, some kind of a sanity check to see whether the task that you chose, in fact, or the control condition is really some kind of a control. So where the blank is less offensive than va. That much you agree with me, I take it. Now let's look at it. Do you?
Yes, but it's not the point.
Okay, I know. Just let's go. I'm moving slowly. So your point now says, but still, in this case, you got a strange difference here. Many of you pointed out to this difference. Now, let's.
More that is that there is no big difference between the two others.
Right, absolutely. So in fact, the pattern of behavior that's observed by this line is quite strange. And this is something that I grant you all, you're right, okay? The point is that there is no theory on the market that can explain it. This is a problem for everybody. Everybody's on the same boat here. And this is why it's important to actually articulate the theories that are being tested. There is no theory that can predict this kind of thing. It's totally bizarre and unpredicted by anyone.
Unless you said that the looking time means nothing and something else explains it.
But if you said, well, but this means throwing the data. This means giving up on this experiment. Sure, that's a possibility too. Giving up on this experiment. But if you give up on it, you cannot bring up a particular contrast as relevant. These are the rules of the game. Either we throw it out completely or we don't. Okay, I grant you that altogether this result is not explicable by any theory. This is a problem for everyone. It's not something that can be brought up as an argument against one approach or another, because it doesn't distinguish the approaches. This is the important thing to keep in mind. Okay, I'm done pretty much. Where are we? We might want to let's take a 10-minute break. Okay, let's do 5-10 minutes. I was told secretly that you've been complaining that I'm giving you breaks that are too short. So 10 minutes. That's way too long.
It's supposed to
And
be
then we're going to start, and then Luca's going to start. I know that Jonathan is know it's
computer
here.
actually, right?
Whatever you want.
Do you want to have
And,
the
but
Edmund?
the thing is, the thing is this.
שמעתי מה?
The binding contract,
כן,
the
אם
binding.
אם אתה שואל לא בצורה אמיתית,
No,
זה לגמרי
there was no binding in the contract.
No, I mean, there is, like, formally speaking, and
Oh,
that,
yeah,
there is
sure.
binding, but you
Right.
sound abstraction.
Sure, no, there is,
The probably the same
Sure.
mechanism involved in
in reflection. Sure, sure, absolutely, sure. But the one thing that you play with is system.
כביכול נראה לי מה כולם
So, you know, if you really push me to actually say what it is, what it is that,
טוב, אז הוא אומר, טוב, הלופינג טיים זה לא נראה טוב, אז בוא נעשה משהו אחר. יכול להיות
it's highly selective memory.
אז הוא אומר לו, זה גם לא...
It's true that there is sometimes a binding, but if you believe that there are being some syntactic relations that's encoded by
כי הוא אומר
then I
שגם
understand what you perform when conditions
הרי
are less than the other.
אתה עכשיו נותנים לך
There are many problems with this
ציור
because
שהוא
טוב, מה יכולת יותר לשיר ממנו?
you know, I mean,
אין
I had
יותר
to
שיר,
lose
לא?
beyond because
זה
of the
מגיע
fact that I couldn't play the game right.
אני
You
ב...
know,
לא,
maybe something like that.
כן, סבבה, בהנחה שיש כאילו גרנדמר כזה, או
Like a
כן,
part
כן,
to
לא.
make
לא,
yourself
אבל
as
גם
at least a
אם-
little bit
גם-
the way it's structured by saying
כאילו,
let's
לא,
think of
גם-
אני
potential
לא
of
בטוחה,
this.
אני לא בטוחה, אם זה לא שאלה של ישירות של
You can't
של
go
איפה,
beyond.
כאילו מה
And
בדיוק
why there is
של
binding,
הפעילות. מה
this,
שהטענה שלו, זה
again, unless
שבכל
you
מקרה,
question me, there
אם
is no relation
אין
where you
אלמנט
can
של
see that it's
reporting,
patched.
אוקיי?
You know, the binding relation in that case is not patched in the
מה
same
אתה
way
מבין על
because the lambda,
אז בכל
the
מקרה,
lambda abstractor.
אתה שואל איזושהי שאלה שהיא עקיפה, אתה שואל שאלה על
So you're
כמה
pointing
זה
to the
נראה לו
lambda
שונה.
abstractor with
נכון,
the
לפי פתאום יש פעילות חשמלית, אז אני אומר, אם יש
at the
פעילות,
root
סימן שהוא רואה
of
משהו
the
אחר.
IP.
לא בטוח. בדיוק
Yeah,
כמו
it
אצלנו.
gives-
להגיד,
it gives you the
כי הוא
idea.
מסתכל כאילו, כאילו,
אם אנחנו מטריאליסטים, אז הוא רוצה להיות קיימת איזושהי התאמה חד-ערכית כזאת בין, אתה יודע, שיש לנו לבין איזושהי...
כן,
The way,
אבל
you know, the
מה
power
שאני
is
אמרתי
very
זה
bound. Sure,
שאני
no,
חושבת
that's clear.
שהסיטואציה זה
So the
נורא
point would
בעייתי.
be that there
אבל
is no in fact no
במסגרת
syntactic
כאילו
relation that sets
אתה יכול
that
לעשות
sets movements
את
apart.
הניסוי הזה
What would be the
עם
syntactic
הביטואציה
relation that sets movements
בצורה יותר טובה, ועדיין לא להגיד בהכרח
There's a
שהוא
problem.
בולט במופק, אבל כן לשלול את הנגדישות,
So call it
כאילו להגיד,
relation.
אם הוא
Because
לא
the
נראה
only
את זה,
difference,
אז
no.
בוודאות אין לו את הבריאות. אתה
Then
מבין?
would be the
כאילו,
only, you know, difference.
אני
לא,
אומרת,
אבל
לא
זה רק להגיד,
You are
זה רק
forced
להגיד
to not
שזה
pronounce
שהיא בעצם אמרה,
full
שזה
and
לא
in
מדד
the other
מתקדם,
case
אבל...
you have a different word. In the
לא.
הייתי שמח לחשוב שכן יש מדד...
אז זהו, אז צריך לשאול אותו, לא בטוח, נראה לי
When
שלדעתו
we're talking
אין.
about movement, certainly, you know, like
And
the longer
נראה לי
the
שאתה
language
מבין.
that I invoke, like
עכשיו הוא נכנס מעניין.
it's clear that you can recast it almost entirely in terms of some kind of binding.
אפשר לשאול משהו?
כן.
In English, right? English.
If it's relevant,
Yeah, yes, good question. So we were talking about how the EEG is not a good,
I didn't say it's
No, no,
bad,
no.
I'm just saying it's
Just-
not answering the,
Yeah.
it's not addressing the problem.
yeah, but the question is, like, is there a physical measurement that would? Because even if you were doing multi-electrode, recording, and still you're saying, I see a raise in electrical activity, so I'm assuming that there's a price. But according to what you said, technically there is no physical measurement that would be indicated if the person couldn't also say himself, I hear this or that.
Well, actually there is. So I was mentioning this Masgarani guy, okay? This group in San Francisco that, they put these matrices of electrodes on your auditory cortex, okay? So they put those matrices in your auditory cortex, and then they can actually extract. They have this like fancy machine learning algorithm that they play out on the results, and they end up extracting feature matrices that were invented almost 100 years ago, by linguists. This is the amazing thing. Okay? So now suppose this is the right method. Suppose you have a kid who has to undergo brain surgery by Eddie Chang in San Francisco. Okay, this is the group that does this. Suppose you have a kid that has to do this. Presumably, what you would expect is that when you put electrodes on this kid's auditory cortex, you would end up reading out
Okay.
If indeed it happens at the very first level of auditory cortex, the one from which Mastroianni records. This is what you would expect.
Yeah, okay. The bottom line is that you do believe that, you know, like there's this deterministic,
There's a mapping
I think
between
there's a map, yeah.
your perception and some physical
Of
activity.
course I believe that there's a mapping.
No, that's
No,
no,
not you,
that's not
like
true.
I
the
don't
fact.
believe that there's a mapping. First of
No,
all,
no,
even
that there is a mapping and we can know it.
otherwise, you know, I would go and sell you
No,
cars.
a lot of people.
No more money.
Right.
I think it's not true. I think
No,
a lot of
it's
people
highly not
aren't
true.
sure
That's
that.
saying you're a materialist. And I'm like, I
No.
don't know if I'm not sure all neuroscientists are materialists.
Look, you know, I try to be serious. What can I tell you? But the thing is, but I'm also, I think one needs to be realistic, and the belief that the natural categories would jump out of the electrodes
Yeah,
is very
no.
naive. I have a friend
No.
who's like that. His name is Rafi Malach, and he's a
Right,
Israeli
no, but that's saying,
institute.
okay,
I think I told you that.
there's two questions. And it's saying that there is some mapping,
And we can
Yeah.
find it.
physical
And if you can find it.
and yeah, we can find it.
Sure. Well, you know, I have a friend who's like one of the best neuroscientists.
Rafi Malach, so he says
He
he
really
has,
believes he's, you know,
he believes he has the mapping?
No.
he believes something. He's not. I keep telling him, and he gets upset. That he's not a scientist, but he's actually a neuroscientific poet, because he has a very romantic attitude to this business, and he really thinks.
Perception and
He really thinks that if you just put the right stethoscope on your head, the natural categories of perception would jump out and bow and smile at you. He really thinks so. You know, that you don't need analytic tools. And let me tell you, many people, especially when it comes to language, but also when it comes to concepts and things like that.
But he believes that, you know, there'd be some, you know, signature, like electronic signature that would correspond directly to that.
Which would actually come in labeled. This is that. This is what he believes. Okay, and I think it's very naive, and he's a fantastic scientist.
So why, like, what are his reasons for believing this?
I wish I could tell you. You know, I think they're very profound, but I don't know. I don't know. But the remarkable thing is, he's a fantastic scientist. And still,
Yeah,
that's
well.
the thing he believes.
Okay. Hope he's right.
This is very disappointing, huh?
Yeah, what did you do last week?
I screwed up. You know.
No, but no, like is there an event or?
No, I think they're simply exhausted. I don't know. They just can't take it. Maybe more will come now when they're taking a break or something like this.
And we were interrupted, but
Yeah, I'm just
okay.
telling you, you know, if you can recast all syntactic distinctions as semantic binding, then suppose you can recast all syntactic all syntactic movement to semantic binding. Okay. Then how do you get around locality?
Locality that's binding?
Like in reflexive binding.
No. So what? No. So this, it's not that you try to recast all the distinctions. Of course, there are other operations involved in movement. For example, in movement you have successive
Sure, just like
implicity,
simplicity. Sure.
right? But if you realize the NP higher in the structure and that hasn't originated in the lower structure via movement, of course you're not going to have an intermediate trace, an NP with the same property in the same relevant clause as so that's the difference.
Let's talk about it later because
Yeah.
No, it's an important thing to discuss.
No, I'm just curious, like, because when when you were
The view is too naive.
no, at that time it was not sorry.
No, it doesn't. No, actually, it was not. You know, maybe it was my naivete, but regardless of my naivete, I mean, the thing is,
No, so the only thing that I would say is like it doesn't affect anything you say. It's just that it's not. It's more about how it should be phrased.
of course,
I mean, it's just like of course, there's still an operation involved in movement.
no, it's like a very clear
it up with this? You can?
I think it has some, no, no, it has something to do with this. But why does it matter?
If we need the
You're
whiteboard.
gonna be stuck, this is the problem here, this is the
Okay.
Francis Scientific Institute uses this kind, you're gonna be stuck with that corner.
So we'll start here.
Let's start.
So what we're going to start talking about now is a slightly different topic, though very closely related to practically everything that we've done so far. Right? So we discussed concepts. We're going to be discussing meanings of sentences, which are sort of composed of, in some way, concepts. Also, notions like cause and a variety of others can only be defined by reference to the tools that we're going to make reference to, namely so-called intentional phenomena. But the starting and then we'll look at a variety of experiments with children, with autistic individuals, in whether the stuff that we're going to be studying they possess in the same way and how it develops. So the topic is going to be propositional attitudes. This is the first part of the next 3 or 4 sessions. And propositional attitudes are usually, what we have in mind when we talk about attitude descriptions are sentences like those given in 1 to 3. So in 1 we have a discourse. John thinks that Mary is sleeping, but Bill knows that she isn't sleeping. So in this discourse, on the one hand, we're talking about John's beliefs, while on the other hand, also about Bill's knowledge. So we see already in 1 that someone can be mistaken. So John believes that Mary is sleeping. How do we know that he is mistaken? That John is mistaken given this discourse, which I'm using to describe the situation. We know that John is mistaken because the second sentence actually conveys that she's not sleeping. So we see that, unsurprisingly to all of us, people can have mistaken beliefs, but not, there are no mistakes in their knowledge. What they know is actually true. We'll talk about knowledge a little bit later, not today. And in fact, there's a variety of developmental studies that are interesting in this respect, and that we'll get to. So besides beliefs, also desires and reports of desires constitute attitude descriptions, and there are 2 of them are given in 2. So John wants to take a picture of a unicorn. Again, you can have desires about things that aren't real, aren't realized in the actual world. And another type of expression involves like orders, demands. So the police officer ordered journalists to leave the premises. In both of these cases, there is a desire on the basis of someone, some kind of desire on the basis of someone. In the first one, it's John's desires that we're describing. In the second case, we're describing a police officer's desires. Is just a question to you, like if you look at the sentences in 1, right, think we have parallelism between think and know, and we said that no entails that the complement of no, in this case, the sentence she's not sleeping is true. Is there something corresponding in the sphere of desires? Like when we report desires, can we report someone's desire, but then at the same time conveying that the sentence that we're using to describe someone's desire is true? So yeah, so actually in all of these domains that we're going to be looking at, there are types of predicates or descriptions that actually do convey that the sentence that is ascribed to someone is true. In the case of desires, it's going to be something like happy. John is happy that Mary is sleeping. Conveys, it can only be true description of the situation if Mary is indeed sleeping. Or glad, John is glad that Mary is sleeping. Conveys that she is indeed sleeping. And in 3 we have sort of what can be characterized as some kind of negative attitude ascription. So John is surprised that Mary attended the lecture. Here, we are expressing that John had an expectation, that Mary is going to attend the lecture, and this expectation hasn't been satisfied. And in fact, the opposite is the case, namely that she did attend the lecture. And 3b is expressing a negative belief, namely that she will not do it again. So we have all these kinds of descriptions of states of affairs in the actual world. And what we're interested in is what these descriptions mean and what kinds of states of affairs they describe. Now, this is not of interest just to psychologists, to what we do here in this course, but it has been at the center of a variety of fields. And the tools and methods of those fields will actually be introducing to some extent in this course. The most prominent area in which these types of predicates, expressions, sentences, states of affairs have been studied is philosophy in the field of epistemology. So this is the field that studies theory of knowledge and belief. But also linguistics, where we study this kind of phenomena when we do semantics. Economics, so if any of you has done some economics before, they have all faced this kind of descriptions of situations. So for example, when you do the decision theory, you study expected utility values, which are based on what someone's desires are or what someone's preferences are and what someone's expectations or beliefs are about specific situations. And in game theory, you do similar things. You know, when you play games, when people interact, they have certain beliefs about what other people believe. And crucially, this proper analysis and formalization of that relies on notions that we're going to be discussing here. But also, you know, computer science, artificial intelligence, and so on. All of these areas, to a great extent, rely on an understanding and a modeling of what sentences here on this slide mean. So how can we? So what do we talk about when we talk about someone's beliefs and desires? So for the first part of it today, we'll mostly be talking about things and analyzing and thinking about things. Though a lot of practically all our insights can be transferred to other kinds of other kinds of attitude descriptions. Though there are some differences. So when we have a sentence like John thinks that Mary is sleeping, we have, on a very simplistic analysis of the sentence, we have a verb, an adjective verb, we have the subject, and then we have another sentence, a sentential complement. Okay? So this is the structural representation of the sentence. But now we want to know what the different components of this structural, what they mean and how they compose to yield the meanings that they're supposed to yield, which we don't know yet what they are. We can have perhaps rough intuitions what they might be. And the analysis that we're going to be pursuing is an analysis that's going to parallel our analysis of other sentences or our understanding of other sentences. And the first step is simply to look at very simple sentences involving John and Mary and the action of kissing. So when we have a sentence like John kissed Mary, this, of course, has a meaning. We know what the meaning of that is. And in fact, we can pull out different parts of this meaning, which is not that hard, namely the different words in this case. So we express with the sentence John kissed Mary simply so we have in this sentence a predicate, a two-place predicate, a kissing predicate, which takes two individuals as its argument, and then it sort of does yield a certain meaning. So we have a relation, the kissing relation, about which we can say a lot, we can describe it. So we can give it a very fancy intentional characterization, what kissing is. We might argue what different components of kissing are, but to some extent this kind of intentional characterization of kiss can be given. So we have like intentional characterization of predicates like kiss. We know what John means. That guy. We know what Mary means. That girl. And then we're simply stating that they stand in a relation of kissing. Of course, as you know from mathematics, and I guess all of you have done some mathematics, if we, if we describe something with a relation, the relation can be actually presented extensionally, right? So what is the extensional representation of the relation of kissing? So instead of me describing, the various properties that kissing, that an action needs to satisfy to qualify as kissing, I can simply present pairs of individuals that stand in this relation. Just like with relation of addition, right? It's enough to present triples of various objects, such that the first object, when you add the second object to it, you're going to get the third object. In this case, we can present the notion of kissing as simply a relation of individuals that stand in this relation. So this is a very naive representation of very simple sentences, and we can see that, you can pull out different kinds of objects out of these sentences, as Yossi has done before. Namely, you can ask what the object of kissing is. So, who did John kiss, or what did John kiss, can be simply represented, what is the object such that John stands in a kissing relation to that object. Okay, so this is much ado about a very simple thing, namely, predicates like kiss denote relations. Okay, so now let's continue to the actual types of sentences and expressions that we are interested in here. Namely, John thinks that Mary is sleeping. Okay? With John kissed Mary, we had a very easy task to identify the different entities involved, and here we do as well, to some extent, at least with John. We know that John denotes a particular individual, and we know that things is the verb, right? So we know that that's going to denote a relation. And in fact, we know that there is an argument of things, namely that Mary is sleeping. So we have the relation of thing, we have the subject of thing, and then we have a sentence. Okay, but unlike with John, who we know who he is, namely that specific individual, we don't really know, or at least I haven't told you yet, what is the second object that's the argument of kiss, of the relation thing. Namely, this is something that the sentence should pick out. So what is the sentence that Mary sleeping picks out? And in fact, we can ask, similar to the question that we have asked before, we can ask the same question also with belief. What does John believe? And again, you see the parallelism between the two types of sentences. And again, in both cases, we are asking about the object of the belief predicate. In this case, we were asking about the object of the kiss predicate. It was pretty simple to determine what it is. In this case, it's something else. Right? It's a bigger thing. And now the question is, what is this bigger thing? Okay, that we are dealing with in editor descriptions. Specifically, what does this object here that Mary is sleeping, the sentence, pick out? And the standard slogan that you're going to hear about, or that you hear about in practically every course on language or on mind or on whatever other topic that's related to this, is that where we know the meaning of a sentence, or we know the content conveyed by a sentence, once we know in what situations the sentence is true. Okay, so this is how I want to characterize meaning. And when we have a sentence like Mary is sleeping, in which you have, again, a predicate, sleep, that holds of an object of Mary, the specific physical object Mary, we know that this sentence can correctly describe any stool in a situation in which Mary is in fact sleeping. Okay? And it's false if Mary is not actually sleeping in that situation. Very simple. Okay? So we know when the sentence is true and when the sentence is false. And on the basis of that, we're now going to characterize what the abstract meaning of the sentence is going to be. And we're going to say that the abstract meaning of this sentence, the actual meaning of this sentence, is a proposition. Okay? So we are we're going to call the meaning of the sentence Mary is sleeping proposition. Okay, or people have called it propositions. And of course, what is a proposition? It's simply a set, it's an abstract entity, it's a set of situations or situations in which Mary is sleeping. So we are simply characterizing the meaning of a sentence as the set of situations in which Mary is sleeping. Okay?
Maybe give some motivation to why um, is the sentence is why are we analyzing the sentence in such a way? What is the problem we are trying to solve? Why are we just it sounds like a tarhanut, I don't know how to say this.
Waste of time.
Oh, it's a waste of
No,
time.
no,
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 this
no,
is
no.
not, this is not, he's being polite, but
Yeah.
the point is, why are we doing it?
Yeah.
So our goal is to understand what it means that John thinks that Mary is sleeping. Okay?
I feel I have an intuitive meaning of what it means.
Okay. Tell me what the intuitive meaning is.
Mary is sleeping in the how to say situation as you said, and from the situation several things can arise.
Yeah.
And John is expecting that John is thinking that Mary is sleeping.
I'm
I-
using the word
Yeah.
with a little difference.
Okay.
How entails.
John is the actions of John will be based will be I don't know he will have he will in I'm trying to be the actions of John will be uh,
Determined.
no
Same as when she's asleep.
they will be based on the fact that Mary is sleeping, and they will be and he will probably maybe use this information as if he knows that Mary is sleeping, and they will be determined by that knowledge.
Easier than what from the board? What you just described? No, but
No, the
it's
thing
hard to
is,
define because it's so basic.
what I'm trying to
Why?
say
Because it's so,
It's so basic. I mean, it's hard to
Exactly.
the simpler the thing you're trying to define, it sometimes makes it harder to define because I mean, it's I
you
don't
know,
know.
I have to say something as a veteran, somebody who's been doing this for 30 years. Here's what's remarkable. When you tell people about perception, you tell them about physics, they usually sit down and listen when you lay out the basic phenomena to them, and then they listen to whatever explanations that you come up with. With language, everybody has very clear opinions. And what's remarkable is that, and I'm not saying it in a complaining way, don't misunderstand me, everybody reacts like you. But I think it's remarkable, you haven't even listened to the array, the basic array of facts. You know, as you will see very quickly, this is not so
Can I say-
simple.
No, right. I'm not saying it's okay.
No,
So
it's just
I
taking your
usually don't
taking-
listen to the basic array of facts when people present mathematics. I want to know
First of
why
all,
are
everyone-
they doing what they're doing.
Sure,
First
yeah,
thing
but
I want is
sure,
information.
okay, fair enough. But the point is, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but the point is, he did not raise this kind of question when I told you about experiments. And it so happens that, at least to my mind, some of the experiments I told you about were totally pointless. Okay? But they were analyzed
more than
with
agree.
statistics and things like that. And here, the method is slightly different. Okay? So only, you know, it's a standard reaction, you know, it's fine. But the remarkable thing is, we're interested in knowledge and in thought. This is what the brain is supposed to do. And the remarkable thing is that we want to reflect for an hour on what thinking, how to think about thinking. And immediately it generates objections. Now your objection, I'm telling you, David, I know you're a good guy. I know you're a good guy. But your objection is typical.
The question you ask, what does it mean that John, this is the kind of question that should start this type of lesson, I guess. Because this is answering a question that I haven't even thought about.
This
Yes.
is exactly why it's interesting.
So exactly. So what I try to do is simply pose a very local question, like a very restricted question, namely, in what does it mean when we say that John thinks that Mary is sleeping? Not only from the linguistic perspective, how this should be analyzed linguistically, but also behaviorally. So I do also want to understand, what might be going on in John to then act in a way that, sort of conveys that Mary is sleeping, that he thinks that Mary is sleeping, which might be different than, how he understand what is the content of such sentences, you know, what kinds of states of affairs they denote. There will be a little bit vague about the actual cognitive realization of the formal system that we developed here. But but the bigger question is, because we want to have some understanding about the inferential relations that hold between, for example, John knows or John thinks that Mary is sleeping and snoring, and John thinks that Mary is sleeping. You know, you want to have a system that is going to be able to derive whatever relations obtained between these two sentences. So we're going to describe the relations, and we're going to have a system that's actually going to deliver that. And of course, I agree with you, you know, you think all the time, you're thinking now probably, so of course you know what thinking is. So, I mean, you don't know perhaps explicitly, you can't perhaps phrase it in a very simple way, and what we're going to try to do is present a slightly idealized system in which, you know, your intuitions that you might have are going to be captured, hopefully. If your intuitions, what thought is, are not captured, you know, you can then, you know, as Aharon, you know, did today, you know, you're going to come up with examples in which, you know, the system fails to predict that someone thinks something, and then you're going to try to improve on that. Yeah. But, you know, yeah.
I think, and maybe I misinterpreted your question before, but my impression was that you were trying to understand the motivation for understanding propositions in general. And I think, look, if that's the case, I think, look, what's missing here is basically telling these guys that we're trying to understand something that's called propositional knowledge. And I think to understand propositional knowledge, you probably want to understand propositions and propositional attitudes.
So we'll get to that. In fact, you know, we're now introducing propositions. So indeed, so what we have identified earlier. So what I did was something very atomistic. I simply, in the previous slide, I simply characterized the players in this type of expressions, descriptions, utterances, assertions. And the players are the verb, want, think, and so on, the subject, and and something that follows the verb, a sentence. Okay? And we have said that, you know, what attitude descriptions describe are relations between these guys and these guys. Okay, the subject and the argument of thing.
Actually, one thing you might want to do is go back to the first lecture when I discussed this business called the representational theory of mind, which we all seem to abide by, or most of us, you know, when you do anything about knowledge. And there you will see that at the very beginning, the analysis that I presented, except I didn't really go into the details of it, is exactly that. I said there is something called content, and there is something that's called agents, which is you and me, and there's some kind of a relationship between those agents and content. And this relationship can take different shapes, and this is precisely where Luca is picking up on. Where Luca is picking up. This is exactly it. So go back to the first one, and you will see the debate between behaviorists and representationalists that I discussed at the beginning. This is a very serious approach or attempts to understand what these representationalists are actually saying. And look at the details of it, like very fine distinctions. And as it happens, you will soon see that there are very heavy mathematical tools for that. If you want mathematics, you can get it. I mean, Luca is a mathematician.
No, I don't know mathematics.
Sure, no, but I'm just, I'm just
Yeah.
telling.
No, but the way.
I feel confused.
Okay, so yeah, so that's actually always good, I guess. Yeah, so we're trying simply to get at what it means to say that John thinks that Mary's sleeping. And then we'll have a bunch of puzzles that are going to hopefully fall out from the system that we're going to develop. Okay, but you started out with a sort of a behaviorist intuition. So you had an intuition, you know, if someone thinks something, you know, I know that they do that if they act in a specific way. You know, hopefully these predictions about action are going to fall out from what we're going to say knowledge is, belief is, and what desire is, and so on. And this is what, you know, economists, for example, have been struggling with for a long time. And it's not here, so it's not, this is not, I don't know, you might have an impression, or you might have an impression, that it's crucially about language. I mean, it is to some extent about language, but it's crucially about modeling, you know, people's behavior, people's, you know, cognitive attitudes that they have, and so on. So the tools that we're going to be deploying are idealized tools that are describe someone's beliefs, desire, and so on.
Describe in what way? What do you mean describe?
Describe to, for example, derive certain inferential patterns about, for example, if you believe that Mary is sleeping, then you can conclude from that, and you may conclude from that that you believe that a lot of other things are taking place or are not taking place. So she's not eating lunch and so on. And of course, this should somehow fall out from whatever system we have in place for our beliefs.
Maybe things will fall into place.
Yes. So if they don't, we'll do something else for them to fall into the place.
What is this set in 10b? This set is something in our memory?
Good question. For time being, I'm going to remain agnostic about it. For time being, it's simply an abstract entity that hopefully is cognitively represented. I'm not going to give you what its correlates are, but it should have a representation of some form. So what's missing now, so what I'm going to give you now is a formal framework, a mathematical framework if you want, and then mapping of this framework into our heads, that is going to remain, we're going to remain agnostic about it. And perhaps, there are some results, and as we will see, there are some behavioral experiments that sort of try to test that and discover the precise associations of these kinds of things. Perhaps. Slightly more complicated, perhaps, and so on. But right now, as it stands, it's simply an abstract object, a set. So what's a set of numbers? Who knows? And in this case, it's a set of, we can imagine concrete things, set of situations in which certain properties hold.
Here's one way for you to think about it. So perhaps, the goal of this section of the course is to eventually study mostly experiments with autistic children and experiments with functional MRI. And the claim is that it's impossible to understand these kinds of, to design such experiments, let alone understand the results, without going into this type of analysis. Why? Because, as it happens, the claim that one often sees in the literature, let's say autism, is that the problem has to do with your ability to represent beliefs of others, or knowledge, or points of view of others. And what we're giving you here, or hopefully we'll be giving you, are tools that would make this very nebulous and shapeless description as something that's precise and formalizable. This is the goal. You can think about it this way. Okay? So the reason this isn't, we're telling you about sets of propositions here is in order to make sense of experimental results that would otherwise be very impressionistically described. And we believe that these experiments do have serious content, and that's why they require this kind of tools.
Yeah. And once we have these formal tools here, right? Like once you have a theory, a formal theory in physics about, of motion or whatever, you're also going to be able to draw some predictions. Perhaps you're going to need some auxiliary assumptions, but the more concrete you are, the more things you can do. And the more concrete you are, the more things you see, which other people haven't seen, because they were simply not sensitive to the nuances we might want to be sensitive to. But as it stands, we're simply going to be representing Mary sleeping as a set of objects. And with this representation, actually, we can already get at something that we want to understand, namely how do we read, what are the rules or laws of reasoning. With this kind of representation, we can now have a nice representation of, for example, entailments. Does everyone know what entailment is between sentences? So when we talk about entailments between sentences, so an intuitive illustration is given in 11, Mary is sleeping. simply a logical relations between sentences. And it's usually
How many of you have taken a class in propositional logic? Okay. Okay.
yeah. So we say that a sentence entails another sentence. It's a very simple representation. So entailment between two sentences. Let's represent sentences with S, not with T. S entails S prime, right? This is a shorthand or a representation that whenever S is true, then S prime is also true.
לא, זה לא בסדר. זה לא בסדר. זה לא בסדר, אבל אתה מפריע לזה.
Okay, we need to learn enough Hebrew to basically tell them go away.
Yes, I guess so, yeah. So what we have here is an entailment is what's the goal of semantics? Or what's the goal of
אני יכול לעשות. Okay, we're gonna have a little break.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. שבוע הבא אתה צריך, אני מבקש שתכין את זה לפני כן, בסדר? ממש לא חשוב.
Not because you want it.
זה ממש...
Okay, so what linguistics or logic tries to do is model people's reasoning, right? So we reason about everyday things. She smiled at me, she must like me, or he smiled at me, he must like me. This is though not an entailment relation, but it is an entailment relation if you have something like, if someone smiles at you, they like you. She smiled at me, therefore she must like me. So this kind of reasoning, which underlies all our behavior, we reason constantly about everything, though we might not be consciously aware of that, is something that we also want to capture. Okay, David's going to say, yeah, sure, but I know how to do it, so why do it? And now we're actually going to present this, with logic, tries to develop an account of certain kinds of inferential behaviors. And entailment is simply the fact that if the sentence S entails a sentence S prime, for that to be the case, it has to hold that if sentence S is true, then the sentence S prime has to be true as well. In this case, you have an entailment. In this case, the sentence S. So I'm going to give you a full characterization of what entailment holds. So if the sentence S is false, right, then we cannot conclude anything about S prime. So this is going to hold as well. So this can be either false or true. And this is a formal characterization of what it means for a sentence S to entail the sentence S prime. If the sentence S is true, S prime has to be true as false. If sentence S prime is false, we can't conclude anything about sentence S prime. Okay? So long story short, a sentence entails another sentence if there is no way for the first sentence to be true and for the second sentence to be false. Okay, so this is simply an entailment. And we already see that if Mary is sleeping, and that is true, then it cannot be false that no one is sleeping. It cannot be false that someone is sleeping. It cannot be the case that no one is sleeping. Okay? Not yet. So we're not there yet. So right now I'm just giving you a very simplistic propositional logic characterization of what it means for a sentence to entail another sentence. Simply means if the first sentence is true, the second sentence has to be true. That's it. Okay? In the system that we have started developing here, what are sentences? Okay? Sentences are sets. Okay? And now we can talk about entailment simply by relying on the notions from set theory. And I'm assuming you know what sets are and what subsets are. So now this characterization of entailment simply coincides with the subset relation. A sentence S entails a sentence S prime if the meaning of S, which in this case is a set of situations, is a subset of the situations of the other order. And indeed, you can easily check that every situation that you're going to find in the set of situations in which Mary is sleeping is going to be a situation in which someone is sleeping. At least Mary. You know, there might be other people sleeping, but at least Mary is going to be sleeping. And as we know from set theory, this subset relation obtains if and only if every element in this set is also an element in this set. So this is what 13 represents, namely every object that is in this set, which is every object W in which Mary is sleeping, is also an object that's in this set. You know, an object in which someone is sleeping in it. Okay? Now you could, now I can already see that Dave is asking what are these situations here? Okay? We can think about situations as really complete objects, as chunks of the world, in which you're going to have Mary sleeping, like physical entities. Okay, you could think about them, if you're greedier, or if you're a megalomaniac, you can think about these situations as the whole world. If Mary is sleeping in the small, in the room next door, right, then of course she's also sleeping in this world. Let's even say in this universe. Okay? But you can imagine a variety of other situations in which not Mary is sleeping in the room next door, but actually Mary is sleeping in the garden. Okay? In this case, you're going to have a different situation, and you're also going to have a different universe or world, right? And it's simply going to be a bigger chunk of matter in which Mary is not in that room, but in the garden. Okay? And in fact, you can see that there's a whole bunch of, this is very, very big. It's going to contain many, many different situations in which Mary is sleeping. Can contain many situations, for each chair in this room, you're going to have a world in which Mary is sleeping in that chair. But notice that these are not actual situations. These are simply situations we can conceive of. Right? We can conceive of a chunk of matter in which Mary is actually here and sleeping. It's not an actual chunk of matter, because obviously she's not here. She's not that small that only I can see her. But, so we see that we have this abstract element here, which is huge. Okay? Now, in fact, Aharon could ask, yes, okay, or perhaps he's asking himself, yeah, what is the cognitive plausibility of that?
Yeah, how did you know?
You see, knowledge, he used the word knowledge. Very good question. It's a very good question to have. And indeed, at this point, we're using simply this idealization. Okay? Now, as
it's infinite. You can
exactly.
think of
Exactly.
infinite, so you cannot implement something infinite.
So, correct. But I think this might have come up in other classes, in actually a completely different context. It came up in a context. So right now we are developing a mathematical theory, so we don't really care about cognitive implementation. But once you start caring about that, perhaps, in actually developing a computer system, like multi-agent system, like the robots. Okay, you're developing robots. Okay, when you develop robots, you want to develop their representation of their environment. You want to develop their beliefs. Okay, and in fact, it doesn't mean that you cannot develop it in this way. What you would need is a heuristic. Heuristic which tells you, okay, ignore those situations in which Mary is sitting in this chair. Okay, and there are very nice systems from logic programming and so on, in which you can do that in a very systematic way.
Just cut off
Yeah.
a lot of the unreasonable.
Exactly. You cut off everything that's sort of not relevant, and you have to specify what's not relevant. And there are various different ways of doing that. But at the end of the day, what you might end up with is simply a simplification of the system we are developing, or a specific implementation of what we are developing here. And why did I say that this was discussed before? Before, like when we were discussing special sciences, right? There were people, you might have been, who were saying, yeah, that you could have very complicated theory, of something else, and then you have a translation manual into something much simpler. And indeed, also in implementations, you might simply have translation manuals that are gonna be short in length, that are gonna give you something tractable, something computationally tractable. But today and next time we're not gonna talk anything about implementation. And in fact, in all the classes, we're not gonna talk about implementation, though it's very interesting to think about, and a lot of work has been done on that and so on. But as it stands, we simply have now a representation of what the meaning of a sentence is, and we have a representation, and we have a way of talking about entailments. And now you know what entailments are in a very rudimentary way. Okay? So let me ask you just to see how much, if we understand what entailment is, or if we can apply the predicate entail. Does John talked and Mary smiled entails that Mary smiled? John talked and Mary smiled, does it entail that Mary smiled?
Wait, John, you said again, what?
So John talked and Mary smiled, does that entail that Mary smiled?
If it is true, then for sure
No,
Mary
that
smiled.
depends on the meaning of the word and.
Okay, so what's the meaning of the word and?
I mean, does it mean that both happen, or does it mean that kind of
Or.
if John,
So
if
do you
John,
mean and meaning or
No.
and meaning and?
no, no, so and could mean
They both have to be
this
true.
and this both happen, and or it could mean John. What did John do?
And John smiled and Mary
No,
Mary cried or something like that. Mary cried. Doesn't matter.
It's-
Hopefully it's not going to change the
and
meaning
could
of and,
mean
but
the first thing happened, and only if the first thing happened, then the second thing happened. Or not only, but if the first thing happened, then the second thing happened.
John smiled and Mary cried, it can mean if the first thing happened,
Then yeah.
only if the first thing happened,
No,
the
not
next thing
only,
happened.
but if the first thing happens,
Yeah.
then the second thing happens.
You can use it in English as
It's just
Yeah.
it's a fact.
if then. No,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be.
So the thing is, I'm not sure that this is an available meaning if you're using past tense, but let me modify the tense to avoid the potential issue. John smiled today, and he cried yesterday. Right? So we can come back to this, to the worry that was raised. So we if we would, I would try to push you on what exactly it might mean, but it takes us a little bit off track. So, but now the question is, does John smile today and he cried yesterday entail that John smiled today? Intuitively. First, what's our intuition, and what is the prediction of the naive system that we have developed so far?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so we have an internal relation, and we are predicting this to be the case. I mean, it's sort of like it was a mistake of me asking you about the intuition about the word that it just taught you. Right? You didn't know what entailment is, and now I'm asking you about your intuitions about it. But given the system that we have, but we can already ask. So given the way we talk, we define the meaning of entail. We have said that whenever that a sentence entails another sentence, if and only if this is true, this has to be true. And in this case, it's indeed the case, namely if John smiled today and he cried yesterday, then indeed it cannot be the case that John didn't smile today. Okay? So we see that, when you have a conjunction of two sentences, each of the conjuncts is entailed. Okay? This is yet an illustration which can formally be characterized simply as P and Q entails P, and it entails Q as well. Okay, so just as an illustration and a task of of our understanding of our characterization of entailment. And indeed, you might want to have a system in which you have robots, which are going to act in a way that John smiled and he cried, that he smiled. And also when you read, in our reasonings, of course, we want that to be the case as well. Okay, once we have, So now we have defined what the meaning of a sentence is. So now we know what attitude descriptions are. First of all, they're called propositional attitudes, precisely because they are describing attitudes of the subject with respect to the proposition expressed by by the that clause following thing. So now we know, and as Yossi reminded us, that we already said that attitude descriptions or propositional attitudes describe relations between individuals. Now, here's another question, and David tried to get at it earlier. How can we characterize this relation? Okay. So our next task is to simply characterize this relation of thinking. So we want to get to be a little bit more specific what it means for someone to think that Mary is sleeping. And the way we're going to get at this more proper characterization of this think relation is to build on the intuition that the sentence that John thinks that Mary is sleeping simply conveys the content given here, given in 15b, namely the content of John's thoughts is such that it entails that Mary is sleeping. Okay? And of course, his behavior is going to then be such that it is as if she's sleeping. But the main thing is that we want to say that what he thinks is such that it entails that Mary is sleeping. And again, we're at a problem that we want to have a characterization of what the content of someone's thoughts is. I gave you this sort of a vague, nebulous characterization of what the meaning of think might be that relies on stuff that we don't know what it is. Okay? And what we're going to do next, and I'm not sure if it's going to be the last thing that we're going to do today. No, we still have plenty of time. What we're going to do next is flesh out this notion of the content of thought.
I think maybe we should give them 5 minutes. Think about it. No? Okay?
לא לשחרר אותם ברבע? שישאירו מול גם כזה.
התחלנו ב-1:15. אני לא אוהב להתמקח עם סטודנטים על זמן. מה קרה לכם?
אני חושב שהחוקים שלהם יושבים כאלה שאתה אמור על כל 45 דקות לתת רבע שעה.
באמת, בואו נעשה הפסקה. תמשיך, בוא נתחיל.
עכשיו אבל יש לך מצומצם.
לא, אנחנו הולכים עד 4:15, כי התחלנו ב-1:15. לא.
לא, השיעור אמור להסתיים ב-4, אם מתחילים אותו ב-1, אלא ב-3:45.
אוקיי, לא ידעתי. באמת, עוד רבע שעה נמתין. בסדר?
So we are now curious about what the content of the room.
I don't know all these things. It's like it's an unusual kind of debate. It's okay.
Okay, so we want to understand we want to know what the content of thought is, and we want to know, and we want to model it. And we already talked about contents, so we're going to simply assume that the contents with respect to which we have certain attitudes are simply the same contents that are denoted by sentences. Okay? And in fact, so we can talk, when we talk about attitude descriptions and modeling what beliefs are, we can simply describe someone's content of thought by simply giving a very, very long list of what he believes. It's perhaps impossible to actually do it in concrete sense, but we can start trying. Okay, so we can say that John knows that Earth is a planet. He knows or thinks that it is not raining, that Liverpool won the Champions League in 2005, that he needs to study more, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so these are all descriptions of his thoughts, but we can also describe what he doesn't believe or doesn't think. So, for example, he doesn't think that the moon is a planet. He also doesn't think that it was raining 5 minutes ago. He doesn't think that another team won the championship at another time, and he doesn't think that he's going to study more. He's a lazy guy. He knows he's not going to study more. And as we can see, someone's belief could be false. So his belief about Bayern and Champions League is clearly false. Namely, they did win the Champions League before, and he might be correct in thinking that he's not going to study more, but he might have both correct and false beliefs. Notice the important thing right now. It seems that it's not possible. That someone believes that it's raining and that he believes that it's not raining. Right? imagine how he would act, but it has nothing to do with rain. Okay? But you know, besides having this belief and having beliefs of something not being the case, you might also be a little bit less stringent with respect to other beliefs, other propositions. Okay? Although he thinks that the Earth is a planet, and thinks that Moon is not a planet, you know, he may allow for Pluto to be a planet, or not. You know, he may both think that it's possible that Pluto is a planet, you know, given what my friend told me, but given what I know about Pluto's size, I think it might not be. Okay, so you might have beliefs that are slightly weaker than those described earlier. For example, he might have like tons of different beliefs about Diane and their opposites. In a consistent way, he might believe that they won in 2008, but also he's not certain, so he believes that Real might have won in the same year, and so on. So you know, these are all descriptions of someone's beliefs, and now we want to somehow, on this characterization of them, we want to have a concrete model of what the concept of someone's belief is, and in presenting or in developing this concept, we're going to rely on an idea that was proposed by Sintika, a famous magician, who simply says that someone's, like you can read the quotation here, but the idea is that the content of someone's beliefs is simply all the situations that he believes to be possible. So all the situations that don't contradict what he actually knows or thinks. Okay, so we are actually modeling the concept of someone's beliefs as again a set of situations, and the set of situations is such that none of the situations in this set contradicts stuff here. Right? So to model, for example, John's belief, the content of John's beliefs or the content of John's thoughts, we're going to have a set of worlds. Right? Again, it's going to be simply a set of worlds. And this set of worlds, in this case, so imagine that here I have exhaustively described what he believes and what he doesn't believe. Okay? He has no other beliefs. It's a weird situation, but this is what he believes and this is what he doesn't believe. Okay? So on the basis of that, we know that, for example, a situation so the set of worlds that are compatible with his beliefs is not going to contain a world. There's not going to be any situation in which it was raining 5 minutes ago. Okay? Because that contradicts his belief that it was raining 5 minutes ago. That it wasn't raining 5 minutes ago. So there's not going to be any situation like that, and there's also not going to be any situation in which